The following is a DW Old Testament production. The people Abraham led into Canaan were a clan of semi-nomads, probably numbering no more than a few hundred, who depended on their sheep, goats, and cattle for a living. Abraham remained in the hills in the southern region of Canaan, leading his tribe and flocks through the countryside between Dothan in the central hills and Beersheba, also known as Beersheba, on the edge of the Negeb. This hill country was a good area for newcomers. Though rugged and heavily wooded, it offered adequate grazing land and was only sparsely settled, lowering the chances of friction to the native population. In other parts of Palestine, there was a great upsurge of commerce and urban life in the 19th century BC, at about the time of the Hebrews' arrival. Cities destroyed many centuries before were rebuilt, and new towns founded as the incoming tribes settled down. Within a short time, the newcomers had adopted the language of Canaan and much of its culture. When the patriarchs arrived in Canaan, the two most important Canaanite cities were Gezer, which dominated the southern coastal plain, and Megiddo in the north. Aside from these, there were a great many flourishing towns in the lower Jordan Valley and in the area to the east, now known as Transjordan. Then there were the notorious cities of the plain, south of the Dead Sea. The best known of these were Sodom and Gomorrah. As long as they remained in Canaan, Abraham's people clung to their semi-nomadic ways. They continued to move from place to place, always in search of fresh pastures and a reliable water supply. They lived in tents and, whenever possible, set up their camps near larger towns like Dothan, Shechem, and Bethel for security. Their main base was the purchased burial ground at Machpelah, where they planted grain each spring. Abraham's son Isaac and his grandson Jacob also established ties with particular places in the hill country. Isaac's wanderings were centered in the neighborhood of southern Canaan near Beersheba, where Jacob roamed further north, most often around Shechem and Bethel. Stone altars and pillars of the kind that both Abraham and Jacob erected to God were frequently raised in the Near East. They were often memorials to the covenant or sacred vow, sometimes between two men, but more often between a man and a god. In them, a man would vow to worship a particular god in return for aid and protection. This concept of a personal God was the foundation of the Hebrews' early faith. The covenant between Yahweh and Abraham is described in chapters 15 and 17 of Genesis. "And I will establish my covenant between me and you and your descendants after you, for an everlasting covenant, to be God to you and to your descendants after you, and I will give to you and to your descendants after you all the land of Canaan for an everlasting possession, and I will be their God." Genesis 17, verse 7 to 8. In return, Abraham and his descendants were to signify their fidelity to God by the ritual of circumcision.